Good evening. I'm Marissa Semke filling in for Michael Koren. Prime Minister Stephen Harper didn't pull any punches when meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit in Australia. At a private leaders retreat over the weekend, the Russian leader extended his hand to greet our prime minister, only to be rebuffed. Harper reluctantly shook his hand while delivering blunt criticism to the Russian president. He said this, "I guess I'll shake your hand, but I have only one thing to say to you. You need to get out of Ukraine." According to a spokesman for the Russian delegation, Putin's response was this: "That's impossible because we're not in there." The war of words took place just days after NATO announced that Russia has again brought arms, equipment, artillery, tanks, and rockets over the border into Ukraine. Moreover, NATO Supreme Commander Philip Breedlove declared that there was no longer any doubt that Russia was intervening militarily in Ukraine. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, our prime minister has been honest and consistent. He's repeatedly maintained that the annexation of Crimea was illegal and that no country, let alone a G20 nation, is legally allowed to use force to seize sovereign land. So it doesn't come as much of a surprise that our leader would use such strong language when confronted by the former KGB officer. Interestingly, though, I wonder if the would-be Prime Minister, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, would have responded the same way. Less than a month ago, Trudeau was pressed by Evan Solomon on the very scenario and stumbled with a less than stellar answer. I normally wouldn't play an extended clip, but I think if you watch the full exchange, you'll see why it's important. Trudeau, in his own words, says it all.
You're nose to nose with Mr. Putin, the Ukraine situation. What do you say if you were Prime Minister?
I'm confident that my judgment and the values that have shaped me and the values that Canadians stand for are what I'm going to be bringing onto the world stage.
But what do you say to them so people know that you're Vladimir Putin sitting in front of you? What do you say about the situation in Ukraine?
Well, what's the situation going to be 6 months from now? I'm asking you, Evan.
Well, for me, my question is, what would you say now? People are trying to test what you would do now.
I've been standing with the Prime Minister and with the Canadian position on the fact that Putin's actions have been unacceptable. His expansionist policies are not helpful to Europe or to global stability, and he needs to step off from his aggressive moves.
Okay, so aligned on that.
But a year from now, right, we'll have to see where we are, and I think the most important thing is that Canadians understand the values and the principles that drive me, and that's what we're going to continue.
What I find fascinating about Mr. Trudeau's comments is that he stumbled over what should have been such an easy answer. It's not a hard question. If Trudeau was to speak boldly about how he can't use force to take territory from a sovereign country, it's not as if Putin would have called him up and said, "You've ruined our relationship." Why was the leader of the third party unable or unwilling to show Canadians what his leadership on the world stage would look like? This was a rare opportunity for the opposition leader to show actual leadership skill. It was an opportunity wasted. To me, this shows just how tightly scripted he is. We need a leader who's willing to speak truth to power, because even though Ukraine's fallen out of the headlines, Putin is still plowing forward. We need a leader who's able to think on his feet, respond to emerging issues, and show the world what Canadians stand for. My next guest says Libs might care more about Ukrainians if they were polar bears. Faith Goldy joins me now in studio. Faith, I don't want to dwell on partisan politics here, but maybe for our viewers, you can provide some context for that statement.
Oh, sure. You could see in that tweet over that was a response to Captain Butts for Brains, the man at the helm of Trudeau's Brain Trust, who he became really sick of all this positive attention being shed on Stephen Harper. And he said, well, okay, tell us more. What did Harper say to Obama about climate change? Yeah, first of all, that's not exactly the front of center of what anyone wants to talk about when you're eyeball to eyeball with Putin. And so, you know what? The dim-witted folks at the Trudeau camp show time and time again they are unprepared to deal with crises, geopolitical crises, and yet again, totally tossing to the wayside, to the bayside rather, what was a win for Canada, a win for the Ukrainian people.
All right, let's talk about Harper's comments. You know, was this a foreign policy or domestic policy move in your mind?
Yeah, good question. I think, honestly, it was both of them. When it comes to domestic politics, Stephen Harper obviously bolstered a lot of support from the 1.2 million Ukrainian Canadians here. He also resonates with Joe Sixpack at home because folks like me sometimes don't get this Diplo speak. You're calling this guy out for invading a sovereign country and yet you're going and shaking hands and having some champagne with him? No, Stephen Stephen Harper shows a really human side to what otherwise we might see as a stiff-collared statesman. Foreign policy-wise, he's showing himself to be a major player. Let's not forget the fact that we went into this summit with Australian leader Tony Abbott saying, I'm going to shirt front this guy, President Putin, when really it was our boy who was making all the headlines. So he usurped and did a little bit of a coup, a power play, which looks good. We are a power player. It's nice to see us acting like a primary power.
So not necessarily to, because a lot of people have said that this is merely to appease the 1.2 million Ukrainian Canadians, especially as we head into a federal election.
Right, and on that, I would say that this to me is at least an indication that Harper might actually be calling an earlier election. Not to get too off topic, we want to see perhaps an election before the 6 months ISIS mission comes to an end. Job numbers are good, economy's doing good, and when you see a real statesman kind of Harper come out, this indicates to me possibly we are looking towards an election. But I do think it's a lot more than that, Marissa. Why? Well, from a very personal standpoint, Stephen Harper has really championed this cause of the Arctic. Who is our major competitor when it comes to the Arctic? Putin. This is the same guy who put his own flag down into our claimed territory. So I think that this is something that matters to Stephen Harper. This is a guy who has championed this cause right from the very beginning, and his boots, our boots, were the first on the ground when it came to foreign policy ministers.
You know, to what extent do you think Harper's comments to Putin made a difference? Putin left early. Can this be attributed to Harper?
Putin came, actually, before he came, he was technically escorted in by a fleet of his warships that were essentially encroaching on Australian waters, which then caused the Australians to send out their boys to combat them. Within a couple of days, a couple of hours, really, we saw a total 180. And it was after this event that you saw a much more diminished Putin. And do I say that's the reason why Putin left? Give me another reason. I haven't heard one yet. So 100% I attribute that directly to our prime minister. And now I think it's going to be a win, though, for Putin at home, too, though, Marissa, because I think he's going to come home and be like, look at how we have been ostracized and isolated. The international community doesn't want us there. So this might actually have an inverse effect for Putin at home. He's got to have some ego stroking, as all psychopaths do. But when it comes to Putin checking out early, I think that was because of our man.
Putin's clearly not a soft power guy. You know, so I guess I'm wondering, especially when it comes to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Yes, that was the blunt truth delivered to Putin, but actions speak louder than words. And what role has the West played in really trying to combat Putin's encroachment on this territory?
Well, Marissa, this month in November, it actually marks the 1-year mark since the very beginning semblances of folks within the Maidan, the Independence Square. Since then, we have seen huge military aggression and posturing. But the Canadians have been there. We have sent over hard capabilities, mostly non-lethal, but our guys have also participated in joint military action, NATO-led and U.S., including within Ukrainian borders, again, over Poland, over the Baltics. Is it enough? No. What we have to do is we need to start sending lethal capabilities towards Ukraine. I don't care if it's just symbolic. And on top of that, we need to name Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics and their governments as terrorist organizations. They're killing prisoners of war, and they qualify.
No, and I get that, Faith, but the honest truth is, the God-honest truth is that no Western nation is willing to go to war, especially with the nuclear power over Ukraine.
No, and I understand that. And we've heard Putin drop N-bombs. We've seen him do nuclear testings and practicing. And no one wants a second Cold War, as they call it. Okay, let's be very clear, people. The Cold War, there were no shots fired. This is a hot war. Sure. No one wants a nuclear war on their hands. But this is no longer just about Ukraine. I understand the world doesn't want to go to war for Ukraine. But Putin has encroached on Canadian airspace, on U.S. airspace, on Japanese airspace. The Portuguese just pushed them out of him out of their waters. This is now becoming all corners of the globe that are within Putin's sights. So you think that's not worth risking perhaps a nuclear war? I understand that. You think it's not worth risking going to war? The First World War and Second World War were fought over just one country, and in the First World War case, just one man. The Ukrainian people are 46 million strong. They're freedom lovers. And for the first time since the Second World War, we have a sovereign European state encroaching into another, and something must be done.
All right, Faith, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Marissa.